Hello there, my name's Jason Hicklin and I've been asked by Liz at Watermark Gallery to make a short little film about what I do in the studio, and I hope you enjoy it. All my work is based on the British landscape, and all the work I make when I'm in that landscape are in these sketchbooks. So everything is put into a sketchbook and that's brought back to the studio, and everything is photocopied. And from these photocopies I start to make a series of etchings about that particular landscape I've walked in. I'm completely obsessed by this process. I was fortunate enough to be taught this when I was about 18 with Norman Ackroyd at the Central School of Art and Design, and I've been hooked ever since. So I'm going to show you how I make one of those plates using a technique called the Aquatint spit bite technique. So this room in the studio is called the Aquatint room. Aquatinting is a process of etching which I am absolutely obsessed by. This box here is called the Aquatint box, and inside this box is this stuff here, powdered rosin. It's a very fine dust. It's extracted from pine trees. Pine tree is bled with its sap. Sap is dried, crushed down into this very fine powder. Each particle of this powder is an acid resist. So what I'm going to do in this box in a moment, I'm going to agitate the box to kick up a storm of rosin. The plate, this is a zinc plate I'm going to work on today, will go into the box and the rosin will fall like snow all over the plate. Now, in the best traditions of Blue Peter, there's one I did earlier. So this plate is now covered in a very fine layer of rosin, which I'm just going to place onto this grill. I'll come back to that plate shortly. To get that rosin onto the plate, I agitate this box with this paddle wheel. And what that has done is kicked up a storm of rosin, and I can place the board with a plate into that box, and that kicked up rosin will now start to fall all over the plate. Now this one here, which has already got rosin on it, I need to get that rosin to stick to the metal, or else it will could just be dusted off. Now to get it to stick, I need to heat up the metal, and I do this with a gas poker and a flame. So once I've got a nice flame, I can now warm up the metal, and the rosin will melt and it will go soft, and that means it will become sticky, and so sticks to the metal. It's the gaps between each particle of rosin that the acid will etch and provide me a tooth to hold ink. It really is straightforward. Once it's melted, it's prepared. You have to remember, it's red hot. So I'm going to wait for that to cool down, then I'm going to take it into the acid room to etch the plate. So this piece of metal now has cooled down. The rosin that you saw me put onto the plate is now stuck to the metal, and as I said, the acid now will find its way between each particle of rosin and etch the metal it finds. It looks invisible, but it is there. Now before I go to the acid, I'm going to add some wax to the plate. This is soft ground wax. It's a soft beeswax, bitumen rosin, and what this will do is provide an acid resist. So this will keep areas of this metal completely white throughout the process. The acid makes things black or it makes things grey. So if I protect an area with wax, it stays white. So I'm just going to draw. This is a drawing I'm working from. This little etching in Pembrokeshire from Ramsey Island. And I just want to get some of this, the idea of this water and the effects of the water. So these areas will stay white, as I said. So it's just like drawing with a soft pastel. And it's so soft you can smudge it with your finger or with a brush. This is a hot plate, by the way, so it's a nice piece of cast iron that's warm, so wax will melt very easily on it. So once I've got the wax areas drawn on, these will stay white throughout the process. I'm now going to do something called a spit bite, where I'm going to paint with quite a strong acid, about 1 part water to 1 part acid to about 3 parts water. So it's quite a dilute acid, but it's still strong enough to etch this metal. So we take it over here. So I'm going to work in this little sink here. So in this pot here is the dilute nitric acid. So to start with, I'm going to start to paint on the areas I want to etch quite dark. The more the acid is painted onto the metal, the darker the print will be. It has more time to bite the metal and so gets deeper into the metal. The deeper it is, the more ink it will hold, so it will print darker. So I want it quite dark down there, so I'll let the acid do its work. It sort of bites and fizzes as it's etching the metal. Now after a little while, I'm going to dilute it and wash it off. So this with a bit of water, and I'm going to leave a film of water all over the metal. Now from here, I'm thinking about that shape of the island in the drawing. So I can now, before I do that, I'm also going to put a wash of acid into the sky to take away some of the whiteness of the sky. So you can just, areas down here I want to be darker, I'll continue etching those. And then a bit more. This really is just like watercolouring. It's a watercolour without pigment, without paper. So it's sort of guesswork is what I'm going to get. There's always an element of surprise. So let that wash in a bit more. Some of the early English etchers would take a little pot of acid out with them, with their plate, and make these drawings on site. So now I'm going to put some sort of form in there that I want. Let the acid do its own thing. This is not a process for the control freak. You need to let the acid do its own thing. And that's sometimes the nicest part of an etching, is that element of surprise. It's something that you wouldn't normally have done, but the acid and the process finds it and does it for you. Every now and again, wash it off to stop it etching. And I'm just dragging my fingernail into there to see if there's a bite. Now it's possible you can overdo this and bite away the Aquatint. And so instead of getting a nice black area, you get a white area. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to dab some of the water off. And with a magnifying glass, I'm going to have a look to make sure it's etched enough. Not the most exciting of spectator sports, I'm afraid, but I need to look to see what's going on the metal. So I think we'll just need a bit more, and maybe there. So again, I'll just put a bit more water on there. And sometimes with my fingernail I can actually feel it's etching. rinse it off. And we'll have another peep. So I'm going to rinse this off now, and we're going to clean off the acid resist, and we'll take a printer. So this plate now has been etched, as you saw. I've now brought it in this part of the studio. We're now going to clean off the acid resist. We need to get rid of the wax, and we need to get rid of the Aquatint rosin. We've finished etching, we need to clean it off and take a print. To clean it off, I'll use a mixture of paraffin and methylated spirit. And that will just give it a few seconds, and that will help me clean off all those areas of acid resist. So I've just got the metal. Now the other thing I'm going to do at the moment is give it a quick polish. So this is Brasso metal polish. Comes in these beautifully designed tins. So I'm going to put some onto the plate and give it just a quick polish, just to buff up the metal so we'll get a nice clean print. Don't polish too hard, so I don't want to wear away the Aquatint. It really is a very shallow etch, so it is possible to damage what you've etched, the Aquatint you've etched. But this will just freshen up some of the white areas. We're not expecting a masterpiece from this, but hopefully you'll get some idea of how this process works and how the plate later on can be developed. You never get it right the first time. So this will become what is just the first proof. I'll prove what I have. Now I'm just going to give it another clean to clean out that metal polish. And into this box here, which is full of leather shavings. And these just absorb the spirits, so I get a really nice clean piece of metal. There's not a lot to see at this stage, but we hope there's something there when we print it. Finally, I'll rub it over with some chalk, and this just again dries up any spirit that's been left behind. And you can feel there's a bit of resistance now. When I rub the rags over the metal, you can just hear it dragging, and hopefully that's the bite of the metal. That's where it's been bitten and etched. And note those areas that have been bitten, they feel like sandpaper. They will hold the ink. The rougher they feel, the more ink they will hold, the darker they will print. So from here, we're going to go into the other room to ink up the plate. So we've brought it into here now, we're going to ink up the plate. Now to ink up the plate, we obviously need ink. So this on the slab here is the etching ink. It's an oil-based ink. I'm going to put a thin layer of ink all across the metal. You don't need a lot of ink to print an etching. You wipe most of it off anyway. So we just push it into the plate, so it just looks like that at the moment. We are now going to use this stuff called scrim or tarlatan, bookbinder's scrim. This is what's called the dirty scrim, believe it or not. So it's covered in ink. And I'm just going to start off by just gently pushing the ink into that plate. And again, as I said earlier, the areas that are most etched will feel the roughest and they'll hold more ink. And you can almost hear and feel the scrim catching on the metal. So it looks pretty still dirty. So we'll now go to the cleaner scrim. And now the image is starting to emerge as I put the scrim over the metal. And this is perfect stuff for inking up the plate. The ink just gets caught in the scrim. Just find a clean patch and just finish it off a little bit. So not pressing too hard at all. Some areas are very, very finely etched. You know, you're 1/1000 of a millimetre into the metal. So you don't need to wipe it too hard. The next part of the wipe is what's called a tissue wipe, and believe it or not, we do that with a piece of tissue. So it's just a thin piece of tissue. I'm just going to, just with my fingertips, bring up or clean off the ink that's on the white areas, the areas that are protected with the wax, and these areas here that are just polished, just to get that full range of tone that I hope exists in this etching. And then I'm going to go do a hand wipe. Now to do a hand wipe, I'm just going to put a bit of chalk on my hands just to make my hands dry, because they're usually covered in ink by this stage. Make my hands and fingers dry. They'll slide over the metal. I can pick up any ink now that's on the surface. Again, I don't want to over wipe it, I'll wipe too much ink away. So it's just a very shallow wipe. I want to print what I've got, so I don't leave any ink on the surface that I shouldn't. It's absolutely clean. Now finally, I get a piece of clean screen, and we do what's called a retroussage. I'm going to pull up or lift up the ink that's in the plate. So I just use the weight of the scrim, and I can just feel it catching the metal, and that pulls the ink to the surface. And then just before it goes into the next room, I'm just going to wipe down the edges, so you get nice cleanish edges. I'm now going to take it through to the press and we'll print it. So I brought the plate through to the press room. This is a cast iron press. It's an old piece of kit this, but it does the job perfectly well. It's an early Victorian press, and yeah, I love it. So, and it's the only way to print an etching. You need an enormous amount of weight pressed through the plate onto the paper to get the print, and our etching press is the only thing to do that job. So I put a piece of tissue paper down on the press bed, and I'm going to put my plate face up on the press bed. Now the paper is damp. It doesn't need to be too wet, it doesn't need to be too dry, it's just nice dampened paper. Paper gets laid down onto the plate. Put a piece of tissue paper on the back to keep it nice and clean on the back too. All this is handmade. This is paper called Somerset paper. It's handmade paper. And then these soft felt blankets will protect the paper and the plate away from the enormous amount of pressure it's about to go under through this metal cylinder. Wind it through. There is only, every print you see has to be printed in this method. I can feel the plate now going under the cylinder, and hopefully the ink is being pushed from the plate into the paper. Now, as an etcher, this is either the best part of your day or the worst part. But this is only the first proof. This plate will be worked on if it has got a bit of life in it. As I said earlier, you don't get it right the first time. Take the blankets away. You can see how the plate has been embossed into the paper. Take that tissue away. You hold your breath. See what you've got. As the plate comes up, we've got our print. These are the areas here. I etched the longest, this idea of the island. Very pale wash across the sky. And these areas here are what I drew with the wax. This becomes the first proof. I will pin this up, I will live with it, and then make decisions about what to do next. I can make areas darker by adding another aquatint, lighter by polishing harder, but it just takes time. I'll just need to have a good think about that. And we'll see where we go from there.